once you get situated, just try to adjust the mic so it's kind of aimed at your chin, and then make sure the little light is on the bottom there.
Yes, it seems to be.
All right, you may proceed, Ms. Sorgan.
Thank you. Would you please state your name for the record and spell your last name?
Yes, my name is Mary Ann Sens, S-E-N-S.
What is your occupation?
I am chair of I'm a pathologist. I'm chair of pathology at the University of North Dakota and coroner of Grand Forks County and a forensic pathologist serving the state of North Dakota.
Okay. How long have you held that position? Or those positions, rather?
I came to North Dakota in 2002.
Okay. Permission to approach the witness, Your Honor? Sorry, that's my microphone.
You may.
Dr. Sens, I'm going to hand you what's been marked for identification, State's Exhibit 20, a 24-page document, and ask you if you recognize that.
Yes, this is my curriculum vitae that I had provided you.
Okay. What is a curriculum vitae?
It's a professional summary of the your training and your accomplishments, publications, grants, projects that you've managed throughout your professional career.
Positions that you've held?
Yes.
Okay. Education?
Education,
Okay.
absolutely.
All right. And is that a true and accurate copy of your curriculum vitae?
Yes, it is.
State moves to introduce Exhibit 20.
Mr. Sand, any objections?
No objection, Your Honor.
Plaintiff's Exhibit 20 is received without objection.
Dr. Sens, can you briefly sum up your curriculum vitae for the jury, specifically as it pertains to your training and experience and education?
Yes, happy to. I graduated from Eastern Michigan University with degrees in biology and chemistry, and then got a PhD at the University of South Carolina. Following that, did a postdoc there up in Boston at Harvard, and then I came back to South Carolina and got an MD degree at the Medical University of South Carolina in Charleston. I stayed in Charleston for my training in anatomic and forensic pathology. After that was finished and I had passed board exams and licensure, I stayed on the faculty at the University of South Carolina, or the Medical University of South Carolina in Charleston for a few years, leaving in 1994 to briefly go up to West Virginia to chair their department there, and was recruited to North Dakota in 2002 to chair the department here in Grand Forks.
Okay. Thank you. Now, the fact that you are part of the faculty at UND, does that mean that you teach?
Yes, I teach the medical students and graduate students. We have some undergraduates, and I do some online education.
Okay. Have you ever had to testify in court previously?
Yes, many times.
In the state of North Dakota?
Yes.
In what capacity?
I've testified always as a forensic pathologist, usually regarding some of the cases that I've personally performed, and occasionally as an expert witness for a case I didn't do but have an opinion on.
Okay. And have you been qualified as an expert witness in the courts of the state of North Dakota previously?
Every time, yes, thank you.
And approximately how many times is that?
In North Dakota, perhaps 15 to 20. Fortunately, we're not a very high crime state, which I like.
I can understand that. And what area are you qualified as an expert in?
In forensic and anatomic pathology.
Your Honor, at this time, the state asks that Dr. Sens be designated and qualified as an expert in anatomic and forensic pathology.
Any objections, Mr. Sand?
No objection, sir.
She is so qualified and accepted.
Okay. Thank you. Dr. Sens, can you please tell us what the procedure would have been with the North Dakota Forensic Examiner's Office for receipt of a body for autopsy in 2007?
I was at the time the temporary forensic examiner for the state, and a coroner would call the office and to say that they had a case, and then the case would generally be brought to Bismarck. Occasionally it was brought to Grand Forks. In this case, it was brought to Bismarck.
Okay. Now, when you say this case, do you mean the death of Anita Knutson?
Yes,
Okay. And you're the individual who performed that autopsy, is that correct?
that is correct.
Okay. Can you please tell us about the protocol that you followed with regards to that autopsy?
Yeah, the same as we do for all autopsies. We first get a history from the coroner, from law enforcement, the applicable people that might know information of what happened, what the last time the person was seen, things like that. We also try to get medical history. I can't remember in this case whether we got any or not prior to the autopsy, but she was a very young woman also, so it wouldn't have been quite as important as if a person had known medical diseases.
Why is it important for you to obtain that information?
Because we have to look for unusual things at autopsy. For instance, if there'd been a heart pacemaker, we would have to know that. If there had been some other surgery, a transplantation, if the person was diabetic, they might have certain findings. And conversely, if we see something, even if the cause of death is unrelated, say if the cause of death is a stab wound or a gunshot wound or a traffic fatality, occasionally we do find people with undiagnosed medical conditions that are important for their family to know. And so we try to get a good medical history so that we know that.
Then what do you do?
We proceed with an external examination, which is basically documenting the clothing the person might have had on, documenting any injuries, collecting any evidence if there was any hair. In the case of a homicide, we would very often try to get fingernail scrapings or other evidence depending on what is there on the body. We then take some photographs of the body, and following that, we proceed with an internal examination, looking at each organ, documenting any trauma to the body, the extent of the trauma, assessing the cause of death, seeing if there's any contributing factors to that death, and then finish and write the autopsy report. Collect toxicology samples also, blood, urine, vitreous, which is fluid from the eye, to look for drugs, alcohol, and other toxicology specimens.
Okay, Dr. Sens, you said that during the process that you document. How do you do that?
We generally I take notes. We take a lot of photographs. We have sketches that we can fill in, and we dictate immediately after the autopsy, sometimes during the autopsy, our findings, and those are recorded.
Okay. And how are these recorded?
I personally work, I enter them myself on a computer. I find that easier than doing dictating and transcription, particularly since I was at the time going between Grand Forks and Bismarck. So I had a little laptop with me, and I entered the stuff myself.
Okay. And when you're done, do you create a report?
Absolutely.
Okay. Permission to approach, Your Honor.
You may.
And I'm going to be utilizing the well a lot with this witness. So.
All right.
Dr. Sens, I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 23 for identification, 9-page document, and ask you if you recognize that.
Yes, this is the autopsy report that I prepared along with the report of death, which is a supplemental report stating that the person died.
Okay. And when you completed that report, what did you do with it?
It remained with the Bismarck Medical Examiner's Office.
I'm going to show you what's been marked for identification as State's Exhibits 22A through 22W inclusive, and ask you if you recognize these.
Yes, these are all copies of photographs that were taken at the autopsy.
You were present when those photographs were taken?
Yes,
And are they true and accurate representations of the photographs that were taken?
yes.
State moves to introduce Exhibits 22A through 22W inclusive.
Mr. Sand, the objection.
Objection, Your Honor.
States Exhibits 22A through 22W are received. This is 23 photographs without objection.
Thank you, Your Honor. Okay, you can just set those down there, Dr. Sens. Okay. And lastly, we'll just work with this last exhibit here real quick before I go sit down. Showing you what's been marked for identification as State's Exhibit 21. Do you recognize that?
Yes, I do.
And what is it?
That is a anatomic diagram, a schematic diagram of a adult female. I created this for you. Actually, I didn't create the drawing, but on the drawing are the location of the 2 stab wounds I found at the autopsy. I created this this year at your request when we were reviewing the case.
Okay. So to be clear, it's basically a little outline of a person.
Yes.
Right? And that's a standard form, is that right?
That's a standard form, yes.
However, there's some markings on the document, is that right?
That's correct.
And you created that,
I
is that right?
created that.
All right.
at that time.
And is this true and accurate as to what you created based upon the case information in this matter?
Yes, it is.
State moves to introduce Exhibit 21.
Mr. Sand?
No objection.
State's Exhibit 21 is again received without objection.
Now, Dr. Sens, you had indicated on your statements just recently that you prepare a report of autopsy that comes up with your conclusions. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Dr. Sens, could you please explain to us what you mean when you say cause of death?
Yeah, when we say the cause of death, that is basically the disease or the process that led to a cessation of life, what caused the person to die. There can be a lot of things wrong with us. We could have diabetes, we could have heart disease, but what we die of is the cause of death, and that may be that disease, or it may be trauma, such as a gunshot wound or a stab wound. But whatever is the process, the ultimate process leading to death is the cause of death.
Okay. And how do you go about determining cause of death?
We do the autopsy. That's why we review the medical records. That's why we do the details that we have. That's why the path residency is 4 years long to study disease, and why the forensic pathology fellowship is a year long, so that we assess the cause of death.
And is cause of death different than manner of death?
Yes, it is.
Could you please explain to the jury what manner of death is?
Yes, manner of death in this country is a public health assessment, and it's to classify each death the best we can into 5 categories. Natural death, where the death was caused by a disease or a process. Suicide, where a person takes their own life. Accident, where there is a force that cannot be controlled or is not controlled, that sets in a chain of events to take the person's life. Homicide, where the death is as a result of the action of another person. And then undetermined, when we cannot tell. This is a public health, strictly public health determination. It is not legal at all. There's a totally different process, and we're going through part of that process today to determine whatever legal charges, ramifications should be present. Manner of death is a public health classification that I make, that doctors make themselves. We don't have a jury. It's our best estimate as to why the death occurred. Was it caused by another person? Was it caused by an accident? Was it caused by disease? Was it caused by yourself? Or we don't know.
Okay. So Dr. Sens, before I get into the specifics of this particular case, I want to ask you to explain a few more items to the jury.
Okay.
Could you please explain what livor mortis or lividity is?
Yes, livor mortis, lividity is basically the settling of the blood. When we die, our heart stops pumping, and the blood that's there by gravity settles to the lowest position. That causes the blood to accumulate in the lower areas of the body that are not, doesn't have any pressure points from anything. And it also, because it's not being oxygenated, it tends to be darker. So it's areas of darker areas where the blood is settled, still within the vasculature, but it reflects that the heart isn't pumping anymore, and with gravity it settles.
Okay. So to a layperson, what would that look like?
A darkening of the skin in the areas that are lower, with a very sharp lightening of the skin, say if a person is laying on their back, where their buttocks or where their shoulders may be touching the ground, that'd be light. In the areas away from that, it would be much darker.
And how long does that last, that lividity or livor mortis?
It starts to occur right at death. You can usually start to see it in 2 to 3 hours. In most people, it tends to maximize and become very fixed at about 8 hours, and then it goes away, or it doesn't go away, but we start losing the perception of it as decomposition starts to occur and other changes supersede it. That generally starts, we say, at about 48 hours. However, if a person's in a cool environment without a lot of sun, it may be a bit longer. If it's warm and hot and the person's out in direct sun, decomposition may start in 8 to 10 hours. So lividity, really, you lose, it's still there, but you lose the perception of it once decomposition sets in.
Now, most of us have seen TV and movies, CSI shows where they set the exact time of death in the autopsy. Does that ever happen?
No. This isn't Perry Mason either. No one is going to get up and, explain exactly what happened. That's just for television.
And why is that not possible?
These are very complex situations, and you have to look at all the different facts and come up with a range. And that range is just that. It's a range.
Do you have to look to outside information?
Absolutely.
Okay. Will you ever be able to determine time of death based on autopsy alone?
Only when there's a pacemaker that stops, and I query the pacemaker.
Okay.
And that's really not from the autopsy.
That's true. Okay. Dr. Sens, what is a hesitation mark?
A hesitation mark is something we call a sharp force injury, and they're very common as a person is injuring themselves to it hurts. And so as they start to cut their skin, either to kill themselves or some people just like cutting their skin, sometimes it goes a little bit deeper and then the pressure is released and then goes a little bit deeper. It's an irregular indentation in the skin and also an irregular, you stop and you start, reflective of hesitation, hence the word hesitation. That may be a person's decision not to cut themselves, or it may reflect pain, or it may reflect any other mental things they're thinking about, but their hesitation leads to an irregular, usually superficial, incised wounds or wounds from a sharp object.
Have you ever encountered hesitation marks in a case that you have ruled a homicide?
Yes.
Okay. And can you explain those?
Sometimes people are actually cutting themselves. Sometimes a person is committing the homicide and they may have second thoughts. The person may move. Any number of reasons why it isn't a, so to speak, direct incised or direct stab wound with a sharp object.
And at this time, Dr. Sens, I'm going to come up and work with you with some of the exhibits, okay?
Okay.
All right, I'm sorry for hovering, but we have to share. All right. Now, on States Exhibit 21, being the anatomical diagram, can you please describe where you put the markings on that diagram?
Yes, I put two markings on the diagram. I labeled them A and B. They are on the upper chest above. One is more toward the center, and one is more toward the right side of the body.
Okay. Why did you label these A and B?
We have to keep track of the wounds, and I have no way. In this case, I have no way to know which wound was inflicted first. In fact, it's very uncommon that we are able to tell which wound was inflicted first. And so we generally will label them either A, B, C, starting from the top of the head going down. Some people use 1, 2, 3. Again, with the emphasis that these are, I just assign them to keep track of them during the autopsy. It doesn't imply that A was first or B was second.
Okay. So these notations correspond to a wound?
Yes.
Okay. And is that notated in your report as well?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Permission to publish 21 to the jury, Your Honor.
You may.
And Dr. Sens, we have a number of photographs here. I'm going to have you explain a few of these in particular.
Okay.
Now, some of these you picked out and some of these I picked out. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I'm going to specifically get to some of the pictures that I picked out because I'm impatient. Okay, specifically drawing your attention to exhibits 22U, 22V, and 22W.
Yes.
Can you please describe 22U?
22U is a photograph of the decedent demonstrating her backside. She is laying.
No, go ahead.
She is laying on the autopsy table, and an assistant is holding her in that position.
Okay. 22V?
22V is a portion of the front from about the waist down to her feet.
Okay. And how about 22W?
22W is a picture from her head down through her upper thighs, overlapping a bit to get the full body.
Okay. What can we learn from looking at those photographs?
We can see the stab wounds to her chest. We can also see that there is a partial lividity pattern on the front of her and on the front of her face.
Okay. And what does this indicate to you about the position of her body at the time of her death?
For a period of time after her death, she was actually on her stomach for a while.
Laying face down?
Laying face down.
Okay. Going to show you, we'll work with working now with 22N through 22T. These are photographs of what?
22N is of her hands. In fact, most of these are of various views of her hands.
Okay. And why was it important to photograph her hands?
It's important to see if there's any what we call defensive injuries to the hands, if there's any trace material. In this case, I could visually see a hair, and we photographed that. And to see if there's, torn nails, things of that nature.
Okay. And can you tell us about defensive wounds, what you mean by that?
Yeah, defensive wounds are wounds that, from the location, appear to be as the person may be defending themselves. For instance, a wound on the inside of the hand may be inflicted as someone is holding their hands up. It's our estimate. It doesn't mean that it really happened that way, but it is based on experience and training and an assessment of whether or not the person was responding in a defensive way to the injuries that were occurring.
Because it's human instinct to try to protect yourself, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And did you find any indication of any defensive wounds on Anita's hands?
No, there was a great deal of blood, but we couldn't really identify anything. As I said, there was a hair. We photographed the hands. There wasn't anything that we could definitively say was from that.
Can I ask which pictures you just showed her?
These were 22N through T.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Showing you 22L and 22M. What do these show?
These are a picture of the frenulum, the inside of the inside of her cheek or lips, excuse me. And we've got a little string of tissue there called the frenulum. The reason we take that is that if a person is suffocated, have hands over their face, and they're struggling, very often that is torn. And we demonstrate that in this case, there wasn't any tearing, nor was there any oral injuries. We also look very carefully at the inside of the mouth. We generally can't get a good picture of that, but we look for it and document that whether or not there's any oral trauma. Occasionally people are missing teeth and things like that, so it's a good assessment of whether there was trauma inside the mouth.
Okay. And Dr. Sens, I'm now going to show you 22A through G. What are those images of?
Those are photographs of the 2 stab wounds that were present, both as they appeared on the body, and then because our skin stretches and our body stretches a bit, how a wound, a stab wound looks on the body is very different than how it may have been inflicted, and so we try to adjust the skin a little bit to get a better picture of how the wound actually occurred on the body.
Okay, and is that what you're doing in picture? I can find the one where you're doing that.
Yes, picture F, and to some extent picture E.
Okay, and you're basically just manipulating the wound a little bit so that you can see.
So that it was back to where it was when it occurred, because the skin stretches, and it would be misinterpreted if it was a big gapping hole. It's not, it's a slit.
Okay. Now, in these photographs, we are also seeing a ruler or a scale, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And can you
And a
tell us-
case number.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that's important for keeping track of everything, isn't that right?
Yes, it is.
Can you please tell us what the dimensions of these wounds were?
Yes, these wounds, and I measured them, and they're in my report, but they're in the about an inch in length and less than an eighth of an inch in width.
Okay. And we're also looking at 22G, correct?
Correct.
And that depicts what?
Those are 2 stab wounds. That shows her chest, and it shows both stab wounds present. The other images are close-ups of individual wounds. And I also should say, to give you some history, if you look at these are reddish. We take them, at that time, the medical examiner was only using Kodachrome slides, 35 millimeter slides. Those were then scanned at a later point I was taking some digital photographs, but any photograph and any time you go through a scanning process, stuff always looks redder than it truly is. And so I wanted to preface, if you are looking at those, they're different than you would expect for a Christmas photograph, obviously. A
Understandable.
normal family photograph.
Okay. Are you able to determine from 22G the distance between the two wounds?
Yes, the distance is approximately 3.5 inches.
Now you picked out these photographs, 22H, I, J, and K, and I'm going to ask you to explain to the jury why you picked those.
Yes, the 22H is a picture of her chest plate. We remove the chest plate, the ribs, during autopsy, and this is a picture of that, of the inside of that. It's actually photographed upside down, but it shows the 2 stab wounds that are present on the inside to show that they went through the ribs and into the chest. Photograph number 22I is the inside, and it shows where one of the stab wounds hit the heart and caused a larger wound. Obviously, a knife can move. The person using the knife can move, and the victim can move, both independently and combined. The internal wounds are often larger than what's on the outside.
Now, Dr. Sens, you said went through the ribs. Did this stab wound go through bone?
This one stab wound just went through the soft tissue between the ribs. The one that was closest actually went through part of the soft part of the rib that's cartilage, so it's not bone.
Okay. Can you explain that a little bit more, what the soft part of a bone?
Yeah, our bones, especially our ribs when we're young, are connected, have cartilage at the end, and they have cartilage where they connect to other bones. And it's a little bit easier to cut through at that point because you're not cutting through calcified bone.
Okay. And cartilage is kind of the same stuff that we have in our nose and our earlobes, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Were you able to determine with a reasonable degree of medical certainty how much force was necessary to cause those stab wounds?
These would not take a terrible amount of force. You are going through basically muscle, a little bit of cartilage, and then the heart is muscle. That is very easy to cut through. And the stab wound also went through the rib or through the lung, and that's very easy to cut through. It's mostly just air and some elastic tissue.
Okay. Dr. Sens, what was Anita Knutson's cause of death?
She died from exsanguination, or she bled to death from stab wounds, one of which severed her heart, cut her heart open, and the blood ran out of her heart.
What does it mean if a wound is immediately fatal?
I hate the word immediate. I can give you some ranges. A wound that would, say, be the fastest to kill you would be one, say, that cut your brain in two. And we know that happens rarely with, say, an internal stroke or something in the midbrain in the pons. If you have a injury, say a shotgun blast or a large ballistic injury to the head, that's very quickly or close to immediately fatal within a matter of seconds. Exsanguination or bleeding can occur in different time frames. This was very, very quick. She lost a lot of blood from her heart. Within seconds to minutes, she likely lost conscious within a minute or so from the one stab wound. And I wouldn't call that immediate, but it's within a minute or two with the loss of consciousness in a shorter period of time.
Okay. Were these wounds survivable?
The one wound was likely survivable. The one wound went through her lung, and it caused a lot of damage, and it caused some hemorrhage. But had she gotten medical care promptly, it was likely survivable. The other wound was not. The other wound, as I said, she bled out very, very quickly. It cut a part of the heart that is very thin. The blood would have, there was no way to stop the blood from that. And she would have lost consciousness within seconds to a minute and died shortly thereafter.
Dr. Sens, were you able to determine what kind of knife caused these wounds?
It was likely a single blade weapon, but there's a very broad range. We really can't identify this came from this gun. I can't do that.
Okay. Why do you say it was likely a single blade?
I say it was likely because when we looked at it and we opposed the edges, it appeared that one edge was sharper than the other, saying that it was a single-edged blade as opposed to a double-edged blade. And certainly a single edge is much more common. But again, that is my opinion. It's an estimate, and it's going on a pattern in the skin.
Are you able to determine what the length or width of a knife based on a wound?
No, we can't.
And why is that?
Because stabbing is dynamic. As I said before, a person can have a stab wound and the knife can move, the knife can wiggle, the knife can move even if the person doing the stabbing stays still. The person that's a victim can move, and that will increase the diameter of the knife. I know that in crime novels and in TV, they can measure it, but we really can't. They use plaster of Paris and they pour it down and get a model of the knife, and you can't do that. Realistically, stab wounds, we can say where they are. I have seen stab wounds with a little tiny pocket knife that left a 10-inch opening in the skin. So we just can't tell. It's too dynamic.
Dr. Sens, your role throughout this entire investigation was the performance and documentation of the autopsy, correct?
Correct.
Okay. In order to determine cause and manner of death.
Yes.
Is it your job to determine who caused that death?
No, not at all. Okay. I can't. Okay. I'm here, I explain, I'm an advocate for the deceased person. She was my patient, and I examined her and to the best of my medical ability, figured out why she died.
Now you explained to us what the cause of death was. What was your public health determination as to the manner of Anita's death?
Homicide.
And why did you reach that conclusion?
The stab wounds themselves were incompatible with someone stabbing themselves and then flipping over and bleeding out the way they did. It would be highly unusual.
And you ruled out the other potential manners of death as well?
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Sens. I have no more questions.
Is there anything with the autopsy that we're going to do or not?
I believe I introduced all the exhibits, Your Honor.
You might have introduced them, but you didn't
Oh, I'm so
offer
sorry.
them.
Yes, I believe I did, Your Honor. The autopsy report was received without objection. If it's not, I'm offering 23, which is the report of death and autopsy report.
Mr. Sand? Do you have any objections?
No, sir.
Exhibit 23 is received without objection.
And if I didn't previously offer them, Your Honor, I also...
You did the others.
I did the others. Thank you, Your Honor. I apologize. Then I have no further questions.
All right. Mr.
Thank you, Your
Sand, do you have any cross-examination?
No questions. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right. Is the doctor hereby subpoena, Ms. Sorgan?
She is, Your Honor, and she may be released.
All right. Mr. Sand, any objections?
No, sir.
All right. Thank you very much, doctor. You may come and go as you please.
Thank you very much.